I can go through the answers to the 3 homework questions I have set up for Chapter 11. The first one of these goes like this. Suppose that there is a temporary but significant increase in oil prices in an economy with an upward sloping short-run aggregate supply curve. If policymakers wish to prevent the equilibrium price level from changing in response to the oil price increase, should they increase or decrease the quantity of money in circulation, and why? We really haven't explored this relationship with money and output. Actually, neither has the book. It's what comes after this next exam, the way we're doing things, and that's called monetary policy. But he just tells you in this book that that's one of the things that changes aggregate demand. So we'll just work with what we have. What I have set up here is what I intend to use to answer both 11 number 6 and number 7. That way we can compare them as we go, as you'll see why when we get to 7. So this is the situation he described. We have high oil prices like in the 1970s, and that's decreasing short-run aggregate supply because that high price of those natural resources in the short term is decreasing their availability. And what that does is creates a recessionary gap down here because of this cost push inflation that we have here. This is the inflation side of it. So in this first case, number 6, what he's suggesting is the Federal Reserve, our monetary policymaker, is more concerned with the inflation than the lack of employment or the reduced output down here. Make the Federal Reserve is making this the priority, as was what was done in the 70s, as I mentioned. So what they would do about that is, since they can affect aggregate demand, they deliberately want to decrease aggregate demand. They want to actually cool the economy even further. The way they do that is to decrease the money supply. Remember, the determinants of this are C, I, G, and NX. If they decrease the money supply, that makes money more scarce, and money has a price tag. It's the interest rate that you pay to borrow it. If that happens, interest rates go up, and that discourages borrowing and lending. It also encourages saving, right? Because then keeping money in savings pays more. So that's what the Federal Reserve would do, would be to decrease the money supply to bring down aggregate demand. And if their goal is to do away with this arrow right here, they would bring down aggregate demand just this much, so that they would end up with the price level coming back down, or the price pressure coming back down. But look where we would be in the short run with output. Way down here. That's why Federal Reserve chair is a pretty tough job, because people aren't going to like that. That's more unemployment and even less still output than we were already seeing. So we're talking about taking some pain on one side in order to reduce the pain on the other side. That's with monetary policy, decrease the money supply. The other ways we could address this with fiscal policy. Who does fiscal policy? The government, which is you could call them the feds, but don't call them the Fed. The Fed is the Federal Reserve. They do monetary policy, which we've talked about so far. The federal government does fiscal policy, that's taxing and spending. How could the federal government, if this were to come up differently in my lab, and I don't know how it does come up in my lab, what if it said something about, instead of the money supply, what if it said something about things related to fiscal policy? What things would those be? They're 2. They're taxes and spending. If the government wanted to do this, not the Fed, but the government, with fiscal policy, what could it do to taxes? It could increase taxes. They could tax households more or tax businesses more to decrease C or decrease I, consumption or investment. That would do this as well. Or they could decrease government spending. That's the G in CIG and NX, and that could do this. So those are the fiscal policy tools that could do this, but the question specifically asked about monetary policy, even though we haven't talked about monetary policy yet. We'll explore how that works after, well, sometime in the near future. Let me put it that way. So that's 6. In the interest of downloads and uploads, I'm going to stop, and then I'll keep it up there, and we'll talk about 7.